name's Don Ashwell. I'm the president of the Gouldsboro Historical Society, and on behalf of the society, I welcome you to this evening's program. Henry David Thoreau was America's first native-born philosopher. He was an ecologist well before his time, but I'm not going to take up the program by telling you about something that our speaker is going to tell you about. Instead, I will turn the program over to our chief raconteur and program chair, Ken Kelly.
We welcome Paul Johnson from Maine Woods Forever. Paul is a retired forester. He's quite familiar with all the territory he's going to be showing us and talking about. Henry David Thoreau made 3 trips through Maine in the middle of the 19th century. 2 of them with his native guide, Joe Paulus, and I'm sure we'll hear all about those things. So from Maine Woods Forever, I'd like to introduce Paul Johnson.
Thank you, Sam. Another top-to-bottom, all-volunteer organization. It was started in 2004. Actually, Roxanne Quimby was one of the founders, along with Mimi McConnell and Will LePage. None of the 3 are no longer members of the organization. But what we try to do is through annual, semi-annual, sometimes quarterly roundtables, bring people with diverse interests together over topics related to the Maine woods, the forests, and woodlands, just to educate people. So we're an education organization, and from the beginning, we've had a major project called the Thoreau Abenaki Trail, which is designed to trace. Essentially, there's no trail in the woods, but what we do is educate people about where Thoreau traveled, what he saw along the way, encourage people to do the same, and to encourage conservation of the natural resources. And the other thing about the Thoreau Abenaki Trail, which I'll probably say at the end of the presentation, is we can go out there today and see most of these things, most of these places, as he saw them 164 years ago. So, with that, also I'm a fishery biologist. I worked for Inland Fisheries and Wildlife from 1969 to 2005, with 2 years out of the military, back in the Vietnam era. My region was the Moosehead region. I managed Moosehead Lake, but also traveled the West Branch, Chassuncook Lake, the headwaters of the Allagash. So I was, in my work, I worked on most of those waters. In college, I read the Maine Woods, and along the way, I kind of put the 2 together. So this Maine Woods Forever project is right up my alley. Since retirement, Maine Woods Forever also had a campsite project on the East Branch of the Penobscot, which we worked on for several years until 2016, when the National Park Service took over the land. We kind of bowed out. But some of the things, the picnic tables, fire rings we set along the East Branch are there to this day. So that's who we are as an organization, who I am, and let's get on with the program. As Ken mentioned, Henry David Thoreau made 3 trips to the Maine Woods, 1846, 1853, and 1857. First trip was with his cousin. Second 2 trips were guided by Native American Penobscots, Abenakis. The first one in 1853, Joseph Adian, who went on actually to be the first elected governor of the Penobscot region. His last trip was with Joe Paulus. And what I'm going to do tonight is describe each one of those trips in bits and snippets, and realize I'm not a Thoreau expert or scholar. I'm kind of a Thoreau fan. So with that, and it's just easier to sit. I have to sit in front of the computer, so it's easier to sit. Can you all hear me without pulling this thing in my face?
No, you should use the mic.
I should use the mic.
Please.
Just have to push this button here.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Much better? Okay. Good. I just will also mention that Thoreau's accounts of these 3 trips, his first 2 trips were published individually as essays His Katahdin trip was published in 1848, his first trip. His second trip to Moosehead and Chesuncook was published in 1858 as essays. The Allegaston East Branch, his last and longest trip, was combined with the first two 2 years after his death to become the trilogy, The Maine Woods. Thoreau's travels are documented, and here I brought some maps that Maine Woods Forever put together. The Thoreau Abenaki Trail map with a donation, whatever, you're welcome to them. Likewise, there Bridget Visaw's book, Wildness Within, Wildness Without, for a donation, please help yourself. And the other map is the East Branch section of his last trip, which is over here, which is now much of it is now part of the National Monument. That's kind of a sectional map. Each of these maps show where he traveled. The all-inclusive map is great to have in hand. If you're ever reading the Maine Woods, you can, as you read, you can follow where he is on the map in the state of Maine. His first trip began in 1846 in Bangor. And he noted, and in that trip, he came to Bangor by steamship from Boston, and then from train, after arriving in Boston by train. From Bangor, he traveled 208 miles round trip. 116 of those by horse and buggy, 54 in a bateau, and 38 on foot. So that's quite a lot of hoofing. And he went from Bangor, horse and buggy, up to Mattawamkeag, and from Mattawamkeag up to the site where now Millinocket, on foot, from there by bateau up to Abol, and from which he climbed Katahdin. It's not Mount Katahdin, it's Katahdin. And he noted, in arriving in Bangor, there stands the city of Bangor, the principal lumber depot on this continent, with a population of 12,000. Remember, this is 1846, 12,000 people, like a star on the edge of the night, still hewing at the forest of which it's built. At that time, even a little before that time, there were 250 sawmills on Penobscot, Bangor, Old Town, in that area. And apparently, according to Thoreau, they sawed up to 200 million board feet of lumber each year. And most of those board feet were pine from the Maine Woods. In his hiking from Mattawamkeag up to Millinocket, he noted that you always travel, even with the best shod for the most part, travel with wet feet in the soggy, mossy Maine Woods. From Millinocket, he met up with his first trip he was supposed to be with Louis Neptune, a Penobscot guy, but the arrangement didn't quite work out, and he ended up going with Tom Fowler and George McCausland, who were both river drivers. And of course, this was in September, river drives are long over, so they said, yeah, we'll take him. So he had two well-known river drivers in a bateau, which was probably far more suited to travel in this section of the West Branch than a Native American canoe. The other thing about Millinocket at that time, it wasn't there. And where Millinocket, actually where the Great Northern Mill is right now, that was a Native American ferry. The Penobscot left Quakish Lake and went over Grand Falls and then came down into Dolby Flowage and beyond. Back then, nobody wanted to go portage that long route and over the falls. So through Millinocket, there was a Native American portage trail that was there for hundreds, thousands of years. And Thoreau didn't mention that, but that's what he traveled on when he started out. And he noted when he got to North Twin, there was a dam at North Twin at that time, and he noted about 30 miles to the summit of Katahdin, which you could see, and he said beyond there was no trail, and the river and the lakes by bateau and canoes was considered the only practicable route. And he had noted that at this point up the Penobscot was only by bateau. So up the Penobscot he went. This is just above Ambitious Lake on the Penobscot, and he went over a series of falls. After Ambitious Falls, past McGannet Falls, Debskeneek Falls, it took all day to get from Ambitious Lake up to, and lastly, over Abol Falls to get to where they camped out at the mouth of Abol Stream. And if you were to go up there today on the Golden Road, cross the West Branch and look to the right, that's what you'd see. Those boats are pulled up on shore. There's a campground there now, but Thoreau camped there on his first, roughly in that vicinity at the mouth of the Abel Stream. You can see Katahdin in the background. I'm a fishery biologist, so I had to work fish in. That evening, they decided they were going to fish for supper, and McCausland had told them that we should find some trout enough here. So while some prepared to camp, the rest fell to fishing, and they caught a lot of brook trout and alternately the fall fish, which he called chivin. But the next morning, they headed on up bushwhacking, up Katahdin. Now, if they had gone with Louis Neptune, he may have, Indians had probably been up the mountain some way, so he probably would have had a better idea. But they absolutely bushwhacked from the West Branch up. And I'll show you on a map, I hope, that this is going to be, this is an earlier version. This is not the version I had. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The way he went up Katahdin was a little bit to the right. There's a trail from the Abel campground that went up the Abel slide to the summit. And in bushwhacking, there's a ravine to the right of that from which Abel Stream originates, and they followed Abel Stream up to the point where they camped, and then Thoreau went to the top of the mountain. At first, of course, through the woods, he was able to walk, but when you get up near the top of the mountain, you find what's called crumholes. It's where the trees are absolutely stunted from the cold and the wind, and he noted at first scrambling on all fours over the tops of ancient black spruce trees, old as the flood, from 2 to 10 feet in height, their tops flat and spreading, and their foliage blue, nipped with cold, as if for centuries they had ceased growing upward against the bleak sky of the solid cold. Finally, he made it to the top, and he noted the mountain seemed like a vast aggregation of loose rocks, as if sometime it had rained rocks, and they lay there as they fell. Now, where he came out on Katahdin, he was not on the summit, and he did not, because the day he was there, the day before, or 2 days that he tried to get up there, it was very cloudy. So he really didn't know where the summit was. He did get up onto the tableland, but he fell short of the summit, and then had to turn back and come down. But before, the clouds would break every now and again, and he had fairly good views. This view would be over towards Double Top Mountain. Way in the background, that would be to Suncook Lake. Or, in this case, he noted that the immeasurable forest he saw and the lake shimmering like shards of broken glass. And on his way down, he noted about, it was like sitting in a chimney and waiting for the smoke to blow away. It was, in fact, a cloud factory up there. It would have been nice to know, to have him go up there on some clear days to see what he would have to say. But from there, he went back down, they bateaued down the river and went on back to Bangor. The total trip was, I think, about 12 days for the distance that he traveled. And for his next trip, I like this. This is good. I'm going to combine his 1853 trip with his 1857 trip because both of them he started in Bangor, and he went from Bangor to Greenville by coach, and then in 1853 he took a steamer up Moosehead. 1857 he went by canoe, but he followed essentially the same route. So I combined the two for the purpose of pictures. He noted that at a fork in the road in Abbott, he noticed these moose horns. Go up to Route 15 north of Abbott today, on the right side of the road, there's still a post there with moose horns on it. Probably not the same ones, but there are still a post with moose horns that there was when he noted it in 1853. On his way, now, the first trip to Katahdin, he did not do a lot of botanizing. He didn't write a lot about the plants and the animals that he saw. He began to do more of that in 1853, and his 1857 trip was a botanical cornucopia, really, with all the plants that he saw and the animals that he saw. Two of the things he did mention were the purple fringed orchis and the pearly everlasting. They arrived in Greenville. He noted that it was, as written there, it was a suitably wild-looking sheet of water. Today, Moosehead is a lot more developed, obviously, than it was then, but still, when you crest the hill going to Moosehead and look up the lake, it still looks like a pretty wild body of water. And This picture I took in the early 1970s from an airplane of Greenville. It doesn't look a whole lot different there today. There are a few more houses, especially up the lake, but it looks pretty much as it was today. Now, I didn't mention that his 1853 trip with his cousin, George Thatcher, and Joe Addian as a guide, was 254 miles long. Round trip from Bangor to Chesuncook back to Bangor. Of that, 140 was by stage to Greenville, 70 by way of steamship. There were steamers running in 1853. Oh no. Oh. Thank you. And about 40 miles, 20 miles down the West Branch and 20 miles back up the West Branch. This map shows pretty much from Greenville, the steamship would go up the center of the lake, past Kineo, and 1857 with Joe Polis as his guide. They canoed. Actually, they had lunch, breakfast. They set out in the morning of, I believe, July 24th, 1857, and had breakfast just to the west of what we now call Moose Island. And Thoreau noticed the monkey flower near the shore. Now, I know that area well. I've looked for monkey flower along that entire shore. But today there's a railroad, what used to be the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and I honestly think that railroad bed along the shore of the lake there probably inundated the site where he camped and probably took the monkey flower with it. And Moosehead Lake from the summit, or near the summit of what used to be Spar, is now Moose Mountain with Fitzgerald, Mountain View Pond, Deer Island, Sugar Island, Big Spencer, Little Spencer, Lobster Mountain, and way in the distance is Katahdin. This would be Lily Bay over here. Beautiful, still a beautiful lake. And he noted the birds. I believe one was the wood thrush, the kingfisher, I think it's the olive-sided flycatcher, and the spotted sandpiper. And we see those, well, except for the wood thrush. We don't see wood thrush anymore. But the kingfisher, the olive-sided flycatcher, and there's a story with the olive-sided in biology. In the biology class, birding groups would say that their call is whip 3 cheers, whip 3 cheers. And in college we called it hick 3 beers. You can identify birds by their call. Thoreau noted on his 1857 trip, he noticed about the mountains surrounding the lake. This is on his way up the west shore, looking east over toward what we call the Longfellow Range, number 4 mountain, Lily Bay Mountain. And then he got to Kineo and noted it, not only it's the principal, and it really exclusively belongs to Moosehead Lake. Quite a story of Kineo was developed in the late 1800s with a hotel that was run and not run, rebuilt, burned, rebuilt, and finally ended up being destroyed in the 1970s. The interesting thing, all of this land on the Kineo Peninsula has been subdivided and sold off and developed. This piece of property here, Roxanne Quimby bought that. Elliotsville Plantation now owns that. And this is the portion of the Kineo Peninsula that the Indians used as a quarry to mine rhyolite for their arrowheads and their axe heads and chisels and all of their tools. And that material has been found not only throughout New England, but all the way into the Midwest. So Native Americans used that site for centuries to mine this material, and apparently this material at Kineo, this is one of the few places that it can be found. The other thing, hopefully it comes back again, from the face of the cliff back is 700 or 800 acres, and that was the first purchase for land for Maine Futures back in 1990. So we own that now. And together with Roxanne's land, a lot of the Kineo Peninsula is protected. One thing that I will show, I guess, in this, when Thoreau's climbed, he noticed the view off to the southeast, looking at the Moody Islands, down to the Longfellow Mountains, to the northwest. That would be Farm Island in the background. And these views essentially looks like this today, looking to the north, on the left, to the north, and to the right, looking due south towards Greenville, due south towards Greenville, this one, and this is where the old hotel would have been. Now a golf course, and apparently this was the second golf course established in the United States in 1880 or so. And it's still up operational today. And the view east towards, that would be Little Kineo and the two Spencers, Little Spencer in the foreground and Big Spencer in the background. So, and looking to the west, the hamlet of Rockwood, or the town of unorganized town of Rockwood. Moose River on the left is Blue Ridge, and in the background you can see Brassville Lake and the mountains off towards Jackson. The next picture is something Thoreau didn't see because he was on the west side of the Kineo Peninsula, but on the east side and the glaciers shaped this in riding up and over and shearing off the top, but from the top of that cliff, it's almost vertically straight down to the water, about 700 feet. As a fishery biologist, I checked ice fishermen there, and that was a great place for me to eat my lunch in March, because you tuck in here, you're out of the wind, the sun is showing in there, and in March, peregrine falcons nest there. So you could hear them screaming overhead. Thoreau didn't see peregrine falcons that day. If he did, he didn't mention it. Some of the flowers, of the plants, he saw cinquefoil and harebells and blueberries and mountain holly, and those are still present. You can see them to this day in season on the mountain, as well as another well-known flower of Maine, really throughout the state of Maine, is the bunchberries, which obviously get their name from the nice bunches of red berries that should be showing up. Bunches of berries should be showing up this time of year. They can't Kineo in '57. Thoreau camped in Kineo, and the next day struck out up North Bay. This is a view from Toe of the Boot looking south, but headed towards northeast Cary, which is at the very north end, 35 miles as the crow flies from Greenville. So Moosehead is the largest lake in the state. And this carried 2 miles from Moosehead in the Kennebec drainage to the west branch of the Penobscot drainage. This is a Native American portage trail, again, centuries, thousands of years been used prior to the Europeans showing up. And on his way across in both 1853 and 1857, he botanized and saw twin flowers, wood sorrel, things he didn't see in Concord, and Clintonia, or the blue bead lily. After the northeast Cary, which again, back then, one of his trips, they had to carry the equipment over, and one of the trips there was a dolly that they were able to use to get the canoe over. And then from Moosehead into the west branch, which this would be northeast Cary up here, the 2 mile Cary into the west branch, which flows down. I took this picture, I can't remember whether it was 69 or 72, flying over the west branch. That's what it looked like then. That was the early 70s. Since then, the golden node has been put in, budworm, harvesting, and this is what that land looks like from the air now. Notice this little sliver here. Hopefully this will go back. That little sliver is that thing right there. But you look at Lobster Lake, there's Moosehead, northeast Cary. You look at the roads, but when you go down the river is now owned, given to the state, Great Northern Paper Company in the 1980s. There are campsites along the river, canoeing down that river, and I've spent many falls down there salmon fishing. It's unless there's some kind of operation off in the distance, you might just as well be in the wilderness today going down that river. I'll just quickly screen through some of the pictures of the East Branch, given the late hour. This would be in the Moose Heart Deadwater. It was fairly flat. Down below the Big Island, it would get into some riffles, but there were no really rough water. It's a great family trip to go from Moosehead down to Suncook in the West Branch. And he noted some of the plants in 1853. He was there in the fall, because actually he went moose hunting. 1857, he was there in the summer. These are some of the plants he saw in the fall: the mountain ash, hobblebush, viburnum, and highbush cranberry. And in the summer, you saw Joe Pieweed, the virgin's bower, and meadowroot. All of those plants are still common along the West Branch today. And the white-throated sparrow. And this is something, he heard at his campsite. He camped on the West Branch and woke up in the morning and hearing the white-throated sparrow, he said, "What a glorious time I might have in that wilderness, far away from mankind and election day." On the 1853 trip, his cousin George Thatcher wanted to shoot a moose. He ended up shooting a moose. I'm not going to get into that in this picture, but Thoreau had some observations about moose. One of them on Lobster Stream, he said, "We saw a pair of moose horns on the shore, and I asked Joe," this is Joe Polis, if a moose had shed them. But he said, there was a head attached to them. He says, and I knew they did not shed their heads more than once in their lives. And of course, moose, as we know it, beautiful animals. I'm going on a moose hunt last week in October. But they're wonderful to see. It's also very good to eat, and we can have our moose and eat them too. And that's the nice thing about wildlife management. The West Branch today, a lot of people will just paddle and camp down the West Branch. Fishing, fall fishing, especially for salmon that move out of Chesuncook Lake, last week in September, you can't get a campsite down there through all the fishermen. A lost art, polling. This is in Bridget, the only picture from Bridget's book is this picture, but polling is a lost art now. Easy to get down the river, but going back up the river, especially when it gets shallow and you get your paddle stuck in the gravel, you can't do anything, but you can stand up with a pole and you can glide up that river, just as slick as can be. It's a lost art. Ragamuff Pool in the West Branch in the morning. River just above Smith halfway house in the day. You can see the beauty. This is what Thoreau saw when he traveled. We can experience that in nightfall from the Big Island looking up the river. This is in September. Somebody was up there salmon fishing. The West Branch empties into Chesuncook Lake, and he noticed, having the view of the mountains, he could see Katahdin down the distance. And he noticed that it's an agreeable change to cross the lake after you've been shut up in the woods, not only on account of the greater expanse of water, but also of the sky. So, and when Thoreau was there, he stayed there in 1853 before going back up the river with Adian and then back down Moosehead on a steamer and back to Bangor in 1857. He continued on. And back then, Chesuncook is a 22,000 acre lake now, held back by Rippertina's Dam. Rip Dam wasn't constructed until 1918. So back when Thoreau was there, it was geez, that's okay, as long as it comes back. Where are Chesuncook? From Chesuncook Village here was actually a paddle up Umbazooks's stream. That was no lake to speak of. He paddled up and they poled, Joe Poles had a pole up to Umbazooks's Lake, and from there used the mud pond carry from Umbazooks's mud pond over to Chamberlain. Now, there's another Native American carry that used thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And one thing about the mud pond carry, it was miserable, and actually Thoreau got lost on his way across and spent most of an afternoon mucking around in a swamp, in a cedar swamp. Today, it's still one of the wettest carries in the state, but when Thoreau got out of it to the shore of Chamberlain, he said, as it was, I would not have missed that walk for a good deal. So Thoreau was that kind of person. He could get into a thrash and be awful, miserable, sweaty bugs, and come out of it and say, boy, that was really neat. This shows what kind of person he was. On the mud pond carry, he saw the plants, the orchis, pitcher plants. We see those, pale laurel and water arum, which is really a calla lily. And he commented on seeing osprey and red squirrels, but the thing I liked most was his observation of the goby, the Canada jay. He called them, and this is classic. He said, 3 large slate-colored birds of the jay genus, the Canada jay, moose bird, meat bird, or whatnot, came flitting silently and by degrees toward me, and hopped down the limbs inquisitively to within 7 or 8 feet. They are more clumsy and not nearly so handsome as the blue jay. Well, I've seen them, and they do hop down and very inquisitive, but I think they are more beautiful and heck what, not as obnoxious as the blue jay. Gobies are really neat birds. He came out, after the mud pond carry, they came out on the shore of Chamberlain Lake, Mudbrook Cove. They camped there for a night. From there, he could look down the lake and see Double Top Mountain in the background. Off to the left is the Katahdin Range. You can't see it in this picture. One of the reasons he made this trip into the North Country, into Chesuncook and the Allagash, was He wanted to see the white pines. And white pines, like I said, in 1837, they were sowing 200 million board feet a year. By the time Thoreau got there in 1857, there were very few pines left. He did not get to see those stands of large pines that were very abundant along the shore, and that fed the mills in Bangor for many, many years. But by the time he got there, they were gone. He commented on the loon and said, "It's a very wild sound, quite in keeping with the place and the circumstances of the traveler, and very unlike the voice of a bird. I could lie awake for hours listening to it. It's so thrilling." I think we can all agree, in the woods, a loon, the calls of the loon, variety of calls of the loons are really special. And if you've had the experience, you know, sitting there, if a plane is about to fly over, it flies over, that sets the loon off. For some reason, it threatens them or whatever, the loons will start to give a distress call with a plane flying over. From Chamberlain, they went to the natural outlet of Chamberlain Lake, which is at the northeast end, which flows into Big Eagle. At that time, even in 1857, there was a dam in this location called Chamberlain Dam. This is Chamberlain Dam today, now called Lock Dam. There was a lock built downstream from it, and used in the 1800s to ferry logs back up into Chamberlain and then down the East Branch. This dam was built first in 1841, washed out, rebuilt in 1843 to divert the waters, the headwaters of the Allagash River, 250 square miles of headwaters, into the East Branch of the Penobscot to augment the flows from that drainage to drive logs down the Bangor. That started in 1843, the late 1840s. And Thoreau traveled down, he noted about a quarter of a mile below this dam, he talked about going over it. Of course, this dam now is, in the 1960s, the wooden structure was filled in, and a culvert was put in. In 2018, a box culvert was put in to provide better flows for both recreation and fishery management. But he commented, when Thoreau went down, he commented on crossing the second dam downstream, and then he went to Big Eagle. He never went further than Pillsbury Island, at the very head of Big Eagle Lake. He never went further down. There's a campsite on Pillsbury Island called Thoreau. Thoreau did not camp there. He had lunch there. A thunderstorm blew up. He stayed there. And after the thunderstorm, they headed back up to Lock Dam and back down Chamberlain Lake. And on his way back down Chamberlain Lake, he noticed the wind was up, and he noticed along the shore there was all this wood floating. Back when they built the dams back then, they did not cut the flowers. They just built the dam, the water flowed into the woods, killed the trees died, fell down, and bleached. We called it dry pine. A lot of that dry pine you can still find along the shores of the lakes today, but less so now. The longer we get away from when the dams were constructed, the less and less dry pine you can find. From Chamberlain, headed south, through a thoroughfare. There's a bridge across this thoroughfare today where this picture was taken, looking south towards Double Tot and the Katahdin Range. That's Round Pond, and from thence, Round Pond into Telos Lake. One thing in Telos is at the outlet of Telos, there's another dam, because when they built the Chamberlain Dam to push water down to Bangor, the Telos Dam was built to regulate that water, and provide flushes of water at times when they wanted to drive logs and hold it back when they weren't driving logs. It's called, that area now is called, and back then it's called the Telos Cut. When Chamberlain Dam was built, the natural shoreline of Telos Lake is back here, but the dam at Chamberlain caused the water to spill over a low area into a ravine above Webster Lake. And in the mid-1840s, they dug a canal here to deepen the water flowing out to facilitate the passage of logs. That's called the Telos Cut. And below Telos Dam, there was a natural ravine, or maybe pre-glaciation, or even after the glaciation, water flowed through there. But until the 1840s, it was dry. But when that dam was put up, and water flowed from the Chamberlain Dam through there, it reestablished, and that flows to this day. And the water is managed in Chamberlain Lake by the dam at Telos, not by the dam up at the north end of the Lock Dam. From Telos, he went down Webster Brook and commented about he commented at Telos, in the outlet, is the rush of water has produced such changes in the canal that it now has the appearance of a very rapid mountain stream flowing through a ravine. and you would not suspect that any digging had been required to persuade the waters of the St. John to flow into the Penobscot there. As far as Webster Brook, he and his companion had to do a lot of walking. Joe Paulus took the canoe down. He said that it's exceedingly rapid and rocky and also shallow and can hardly be considered navigable, unless that means that what is launched into it is surely to be carried down it swiftly, though it may be dashed to pieces by the way. It's somewhat like navigating a thunderspout. And at the right flows now, Webster Stream, and I have not canoed. Webster Stream is one of the few bodies of water along the whole trail that I have not seen or hiked or canoed. From Webster Stream, went down, it passes through Second Lake, Matagamon Lake, First Lake, Matagamon, and there is an island in Matagamon called Thoreau Island. There's also an island called Louse Island. It's where the woodsmen coming out of the woods would stop and get deloused after spending the winter in there and headed down to Bangor. Okay. On the islands in Matagamon and also somewhat down the East Branch and the north part of Baxter Park, there's jack pine. And it's a species Thoreau noted, he didn't see that down in Concord. He was very familiar with the trees. There was no jack pine down there, and he thought it was quite interesting. He portaged over Matagamon Dam into the upper East Branch, which is for a while fairly gentle. In the first 5 miles, it drops about 50 feet, about 10 feet per mile, a nice paddle from Matagamon. Now we're into waters, the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument. First 10 miles are nice and smooth, and then, he camped up there at what's called the Checkerberry. Joe Polis made Checkerberry tea for dinner. To this day, it's called the Checkerberry, he called it the Checkerberry Tea Camp, and the International Appalachian Trail put a sign there that said, this is roughly where Thoreau camped in 1857, making tea out of the leaves of Checkerberry. From the first 10 miles, however, things change on the East Branch, beginning with stair falls. In the next 5 1/4 miles, the East Branch drops 170 feet in elevation. First, stair falls. Then Haskell Rock Pitch. Pond Pitch. One of our Maine Woods Forever campsites is at Pond Pitch. Grand Pitch, and he noted that it was, and finally, the last set of rapids in that 5 miles is called the Hulling Machine. It got that name because the logs that were driven down the East Branch with the bark on, after it came out the lower end of the Hulling Machine, often did not have any bark on it. It's something you do not do to this portage trail. Thoreau commented, I cannot tell you how many times we had to walk on account of the falls or rapids along that section. He did comment about the berries that he found on the portages that he had to make in that section, and noted, in our 3 journeys over the carries, they had to make 3 trips to get the canoe and all their gear over, 3 journeys, for we were obliged to go over the ground 3 times whenever the canoe was taken out. We did full justice to the berries, and they were just what we wanted to correct the effect of our hard bread and pork diet. Below Bolin Falls, the last set of falls, which is not pictured here, the river gradually flows for the next 8 or 10 miles. It's a gentle pitch, easily paddled. And Thoreau noted that he saw bald eagles, mergansers, broods of mergansers, and he saw a great horned owl in that section. Then the river, as the Saboas River flows in, it flattens out broad floodplains dominated by elms and especially silver maple. Silver maple floodplains go way back from the river, and if you look closely at this picture, you see those ferns. This picture was taken in the spring. You see those fiddleheads, ostrich ferns. Fabulous fiddleheaded along the lower section of the East Branch that's now in Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument. He noted along the way cardinal flower, Canada lilies, and chives. They grow along the East Branch. All these pictures were taken along the East Branch. Wasaticook Stream, which originates in the center of Baxter Park, actually way up in the Klondike in Baxter Park, and then flows down and out of the park. It was logged and dammed and driven in the late 1800s many times. When Thoreau passed, this is what Wasaticook Stream looks like flowing into the East Branch in the foreground, Wasaticook Stream. When Thoreau passed it, he didn't even notice it. Next morning he said, we must have passed Wasaticook Stream where we can. What's happened here probably since 1857 is all the logging and the drives and the freshets that came down probably opened that stream bed quite a bit. So he would have noticed this going by it. So, just below Wasaticook Stream is the Hunt Farm. It was built in, I think, 1835 to provide provisions for people in the woods. And it also was one of the Katahdin, when it was first climbed, was climbed from the east. It wasn't climbed from the south or from Roaring Brook. It came in, people would go to the Hunt Farm, and it was located strategically at a place in the East Branch where it was not deep, it was not rocky, it was very gravelly, so it was a very low flow. So you could ford it there. So you could ford buckboards at the right flow, you could get across there. And from there, a trail went up the west side of the East Branch, actually it went all the way to Eagle Lake, or back in the Woodsman's day. Thoreau had planned, on this trip, his plan was to climb Katahdin. But his friend's name was Edward Hoare, and in the mud pond carry, his feet got all chafed because of being waterlogged all day, walking around in the mud. So he was not fit to do the trip, so they bypassed the trip to Katahdin. It would have really been interesting to see what Thoreau said if he had gone up Katahdin in 1857 from the east. He didn't. But he would have, he noted. He did not see it from the river at all. But if he'd gone across the outlet of Katahdin Lake, looking up towards Katahdin, and from the top of Katahdin, looking back, that last picture was taken right there, looking back up. These are the things he would have seen had he gone that route. Below the Hunt Farm, you have Whetstone Falls and a long stretch of river, Grindstone Falls along the way, and then the river joins the West Branch. East Branch joins the West Branch. They camped at the mouth, near the mouth where the East Branch flowed into the West Branch. And he noticed, things have quite changed since I was here 11 years ago. While there were then but one or two houses, I now found quite a village with sawmills and a store. So just in the 11 years from 1846 to 1857, the river on its way from Mattawamkeag up to what's called Nicketow at the mouth of the East Branch and West Branch. There was quite a bit of development. From there, he traveled down, of course, the Penobscot, wide, a lot of islands in it. This is a picture of the Piscataquis. This is Howland on the left, the Piscataquis River running into the Penobscot, and below that, the numerous islands, all of the islands in the Penobscot River from Indian Island north all the way to Nicketow, and I believe the Abenakis claim all the islands all the way to the headwaters. They're all part of the Indian reservation. So, and on, he noticed, as we drew near Old Town, I asked Polis if he was not glad to get home again. But there was no relenting to his wildness, and he said, it makes no difference to me where I am. Because that's a statement that you know, Joe Polis, the Indians, the woods, they lived there. That was their home. They lived on Indian Island in the summer. In the fall, they'd go upriver and hunt. But then in the winter, they'd move back down to the coast. But this whole area was Abenaki territory at that time. And Joe Polis was just at home on Indian Island as he was on Chamberlain Lake or on Tinian. It was kind of interesting. So he said, when he discharged Joe Polis on August 3rd, 1857, this was the last I saw of Joe Polis. We took the last train and reached Bangor that night, his last trip. Just some brief mention of Maine Woods Forever. We sponsored back in 2007, we sponsored a festival in Greenville, the Thoreau Abenaki Festival, and commissioned sculptures at this is the Moosehead Historical Society building now, by the way, and they're located outside the Historical Society. We had two kiosks erected, one on the shore of Moosehead Lake and one on Indian Island, describing the Thoreau Abenaki Trail and its purposes. There's the one on Indian Island. Thoreau Abenaki Festival, which is held the third week in July, pretty much in conjunction with Thoreau's arrival in Greenville on his 1857 trip that weekend. And there were programs usually from Wednesday through Saturday. This year, they actually had a cultural immersion where people could 10 people signed up and spent 3 days on the Penobscot with Wabanaki guides, with a cultural immersion into the Wabanakis. And the maps, we had these commissions, these maps, and had them produced. The one on the left, the trail map, is an overview of all of his 3 trips to Maine. And as I said earlier, if you're reading the Maine Woods, that book, you can look on the map and see right where he was on each of those days. On the back side of that, there's information from the Maine Woods. The map on the right is what we call the sectional map of the East Branch. It's somewhat out of date. It was produced in 2013, and it was 2016 it became a national monument. Nevertheless, the information on it, the portage trails, the information on the back is all still valid. And Richard Besaw, in 2007, produced a book, Wildness Within, Wildness Without, for Maine Woods Forever and for the Thoreau Abenaki Trail. So I guess, and those are what I have on hand. Take a look. If you want one, we'd appreciate a small donation to Maine Woods Forever, but please, help yourself. If they all disappear, that'd be great. In closing, Maine is a country full of evergreen trees. This is Thoreau. Maine is a country full of evergreen trees of mossy silver birches and watery maples. The ground dotted with insipid small red berries, strewn with damp, moss-grown rocks. A country diversified with innumerable lakes and rapid streams. People with trout, various species of minnows, with salmon, shad, pickerel, and other fishes. The forest resounding at rare intervals with the note of the chickadee, the blue jay, and the woodpecker, the scream of the fishhawk and the eagle, the laugh of the loon, and the whistle of ducks along solitary streams. At night, with the hooting of owls and howling of wolves. In summer, swarming with myriads of blackflies and mosquitoes, more formidable than wolves to the white man. The only thing missing today from that is the wolves. We have no wolves. So it's pretty much, what I say is the Thoreau Abenaki Trail is an opportunity to follow with Thoreau, where the Native Americans preceded Thoreau and Europeans by thousands of years. Essentially, since the birch bark canoe was invented, when they went from log dugout canoes to birch bark, that's when they were able to travel through the woods easily, carrying them over their heads. And so the Maine Woods is quite an experience still. A lot more of it's accessible now by road, but you can get off the roads, and it's a wonderful experience. And thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
Are there commercial trips that you can take
Absolutely.
that are historical in nature, not whitewater rafting?
Yes, absolutely. There are several outfitters. Well, there are outfitters who do it. I'm not advertising from anybody, but I know the Allagash canoes out of Greenville, Mahoney's out of Mahoosic Guide Service. They take people on West Branch trips. And it's not whitewater rafting, it's canoe camping, canoeing and paddling and camping, eating over an open fire, and they visit these areas. And Thoreau's travels and the Wabanaki perspective is put into these. And of course, from the Allagash Waterway, numerous guides will guide trips. And on the Penobscot River itself, I believe the Penobscots are gearing up for trips to bring people in to show them how they live, what the Penobscot means to them. Because it's something their perspective of the land and resources is totally different from the European perspective. And it's kind of refreshing to hear what their perspective. Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious about the wetness underfoot. Almost all the time?
Well, in the low areas, the spruce fir forest, especially in low areas, tends to be very mossy and very wet. And you get onto the ridges, of course, they're not going to be very wet. But of course, where you're traveling on canoeing, you're generally on the lowlands, adjacent to the rivers. The carries are generally lowland between two waterways, so they tend to be quite wet.
To this day.
To this day. And we have drought. This year, May and June were very dry, and we wondered, oh my gosh, and then July the sky opened up. But way up north, the Allagash all summer has been as low as it's been. It's at 50 or 25 or 50% of its median level this year because northern Maine didn't get as much rain as we did.
Why are all the jack pines dying?
This land, after the ice receded, and then you get the sedges and all, and they're among the first species. They're found only in ledgy, very sandy, well-drained soils. You find them down east, you find them north of Baxter, you find them on the way in from Baxter, and to the west of Route 201, in towards Spencer Lake, along the Capitol Road in there. It's not the Capitol, whatever it is, there are jack pines. Why they're dying, I don't know.
I'm on the Winter Harbor Fire Department, and we went to the top of Spooty Head in the early 70s.
Yep.
And at the time, they were doing a burn up there, you see, and the ranger said at that time, this is the southern terminus of the jack pine. There's none down there, they're all up that way. So that's why they could be dying. You're at the very edge of where they
And you
going.
know, as climate changes, things are gonna shift north. We're gonna see trees that we don't normally have, and the trees that we do have, some of them are going to shift, probably definitely not an island pine. And then added to that now, the invasive species that are coming, for hemlocks and ash and whatever. It's not encouraging. Thank you, you've been, one more.
I'm sorry, jack pine, is that the one that needs a fire to
Yes,
throw their
yes.
seeds out?
yeah, that's where in Michigan, there's a lot of jack pine, not in the upper, no, it's not in the upper peninsula, it's in the mainland. And yes, fire, and the Kirtland's warbler is dependent, that's the only habitat to find Kirtland's warbler. We don't have them here, but, yes, fire is just like the lodgepole pine out west. Thank you for your patience.